You didn't kill them Jenkins brothers. You ain't even from the West.
I knew there was something wrong with you. A woman!
No, it was for you, I swear!
You said that to me so many times! Stop telling lies about how everything is for my sake!
Noticing a pattern here? If I were to show you these 3 clips and then ask you what they all have in common, and if you were to reply, they all show the liar revealed trope, you would 100% be correct. The liar revealed trope is actually a disturbingly common trope in film media overall, and it's even listed on TV Tropes website, which is how you know it's official, clearly. This trope is essentially a storytelling device often used in film where the main character will often tell a lie to other characters in the film, generally a very big lie that leads them along. And generally at some point during a third act, this lie is revealed and this person is exposed as a dishonest protagonist. As you can probably guess, this trope is not really the best to use overall since A, it can seem like a lazy cliche that is very easy to fall back on for some easy tension, and B, it tends to make it hard to root for the main protagonist since, well, they're a liar. As a result, there are many movies that actually introduce this trope, but it often does kill the film since it makes it hard to root for the main character. And once again, it just seems like cheap tension too. However, even with all the overused bad examples of this trope in film, there are actually a few examples of this being done pretty well and in subverting this trope and making it something better. So that's what I wanted to discuss today, both the good and bad examples of this trope being used in film. To start though, let's show perhaps my least favorite example of this trope being used at all in a movie that I personally don't care for very much at all, that being A Bug's Life. This film in particular has a pretty notorious example of this trope, and in my opinion, the worst one, which is where the main character in the film, Flick, is exposed as a liar for telling the colony of ants that he'd brought a bunch of warrior bugs that were in fact just circus bugs instead. Immediately after this, all the ants get mad at Flick and call him out for being a liar, and decide to not go with his plan that he'd been planning with the circus bugs to have a fake bird scare off the grasshoppers that have been harassing them for a long time now. So, already, there's a lot of things wrong with the ants' reaction here to Flick. One pretty notable thing here is that the circus bugs actually saved Dot, one of the younger ants, in an earlier scene in this movie. So they already proved themselves to be willing to help the ants, and pretty useful when it comes down to it. So the fact the ants get mad at them here for no reason when they've already shown they want to help just because they're circus bugs honestly comes off as kind of prejudiced to just really dumb and doesn't make any sense. Like, sure, maybe they're not warrior bugs, but they still successfully saved Dot from a giant bird. That's gotta count for something, right? She would have died otherwise. And the other big thing here with the Queen and Princess Ada getting mad at Flick for trying to dupe them is honestly just really hypocritical, because they did that exact same thing to him. Earlier in the movie, they tell Flick to leave the colony to go find warrior bugs, thinking he'll never come back, and is a way to dupe him and get him out of their hair, essentially. In doing so, Flick happened to stumble upon the circus bugs, which he thought were warrior bugs at first, so he was already doing what they told him to anyway, which, of course, really was just them trying to trick him. And he didn't even realize they weren't warrior bugs until later on when they told him, so like, what's the point here? Also, at this point in the movie, the bugs aren't necessarily going to be the ants' main line of defense, it's going to be the giant fake bird that they're going to use to scare off the grasshoppers with. So really, none of these people have any reason to get mad, and honestly, they're all just being hypocrites and way too mean-spirited here. This is really the liar reveal trope at its worst, since so many things come together here in such an awful way. It really is very poorly executed. However, to look at a similar setup in a different animated film that honestly does this trope way better, look no further than the 2011 Johnny Depp masterpiece Rango. Rango is honestly a really fantastic, kind of underrated movie overall, with a really original, fresh premise for a 2010s animated movie, and also decidedly not really being a kids movie at all, and leading into a really interesting Western motif with a surprising amount of emotional heft and deeper stuff going on overall in this movie. This movie is seriously really well written. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. And again, another notable thing about this movie is that it does use the liar reveal trope, but here I feel like it works a lot better. The general idea here is that Rango is a pet lizard that happens to fall off a trailer during a big road trip. He ends up wandering around the desert for quite a long time until he comes across a tiny western town. Rango has always dreamed of being an actor, so it's here he actually decides to put those skills to good use and claims to the town he's a big gunslinger that shot the Johnson brothers with only one bullet. Upon hearing this, the town immediately believes him and decides to appoint him as their new sheriff. However, after attempting to track down a bank robbery at the water bank in town, a stranger comes into town, that being Rattlesnake Jake, who immediately knows that Rango is full of crap because Jake is a real gunslinger and immediately exposes Rango as the fraud he is. Jake banishes Rango from the town, to which Rango wanders around the desert a little bit until he encounters the Spirit of the West, who tells him he has to be the star of his own story, to which Rango realizes this means just be himself. I personally think the situation here works a lot better than it did in A Bug's Life, since A, Rango does have more of a reason to lie here, I would say, since he wasn't really sure if the people in town would try to kill him if he didn't act tough. And I think what also makes this sequence work really well is the fact that people don't really get angry at him or try to argue with him, they just kind of sadly watch him go, as Jake forces him to leave. This obviously prompts Rango to learn the lesson of just being himself and not get caught up trying to play a role like he was for the entire town here. And that also makes his return to the town to come save them from Jake and the mayor all the more impactful now that he's accepted who he is and come to terms with that. It's honestly a really brilliant way to play upon this trope that often is just really bad and often will kill a movie. Somehow, this movie actually makes it part of its strengths. This film honestly does play upon a lot of different tropes in really interesting creative ways overall, so if you haven't seen it, I do highly recommend it. It's definitely an underrated gem. So this and A Bug's Life showcase the most common setup for the liar revealed trope, but in actuality, there's a lot of ways this trope can be approached. One movie that actually tackles this in a totally different way is Mrs. Doubtfire. This was a comedy film from 20th Century Fox in the year of 1993, starring Robin Williams as the titular Mrs. Doubtfire, which is actually the alternate persona for a divorced dad in this movie, who, of course, Williams also plays. The idea here is that Williams wants to see his kids that his divorced wife actually has custody of. So, after learning his wife is looking for a nanny to take care of the kids during the day, he decides to pose as an old English nanny named Mrs. Doubtfire and get hired by his wife to hang out with his kids more. Of course, inevitably, this does not last forever, because later in the film, it's revealed to his wife that he's actually been the one posing as the nanny this whole time. He's exposed, and he and his wife stay apart forever, although eventually he does get to share custody of their kids. So, is this a good subversion of the trope here? No, not really at all. Mrs. Doubtfire actually has remained a surprisingly popular film even over 30 years after its release, but honestly I think one of the big flaws of this film is the way it portrays the lie reveal trope. Honestly, it just kind of makes Daniel, who's the dad character that Robin is portraying in this movie, come off as rather obsessive and stalkerish, which I personally don't care for. Like, he is allowed to see his kids initially anyway, he gets to see them every Saturday, but for some reason, he wants to see them even more, so that's why he comes up with a Mrs. Doubtfire persona. To me, there's no real motivation for him to do this at the end of the day, and it just makes him look overly obsessive and clingy, like he wasn't satisfied with seeing the kids every Saturday and had to see them every day instead. This is essentially the inverse of the issue with the Bug's Life trope, since instead of the issue being a similar situation to where the ants were getting him mad at Flick for no real reason and bullying him essentially, the issue here actually is the liar himself, that being Daniel, since he really had no reason to lie and just comes off as really creepy because of it. As a result, it really makes it hard to root for this character at all throughout the entirety of this film, but it also makes this film very hard to go back to too. While Robin Williams is still mostly pretty funny in the film overall, as usual, there are some pretty blatant flaws with the film's writing just in general. However, there is actually another movie that takes a similar approach with this trope, but does it much, much better. And that film is actually Tootsie from 1982, which is actually regarded by the American Film Institute as one of the greatest films of all time. Tootsie stars Dustin Hoffman, who plays Michael Dorsey in this film, who is a respected actor, but nobody really wants to hire him because he's very egomaniacal and difficult to work with. So for the time being, Michael is making ends meet by acting as a server in a restaurant and also teaching acting classes. Michael ends up hearing about a potential acting gig on the daytime soap opera Southwest General from his friend Sandy, who tries to audition for the role of Emily in this show, but fails. As a result, Michael comes up with the idea of disguising himself as a woman named Dorothy and auditions for the role of Emily in the Southwest General himself and actually gets the part. He ends up putting on a very in-your-face, no-nonsense role as Emily, which actually does land him the audition since none of the other auditions tried this approach. However, this inevitably becomes a problem for him since he falls in love with Julie, one of the workers on the show. Michael does try making advances on her as Dorothy, but unfortunately Julie rejects this. Michael eventually decides to expose himself on air in front of everybody on live TV by improvising a revelation about his character Emily that she's actually Edward, her own twin brother, that's come back for revenge. It's all very silly and over the top, but it gets the job done. Well, sort of anyway, since Julie is obviously very mad at Michael for lying to her this whole time. Julie actually doesn't talk to him for some weeks, and eventually they do get together outside the studio. It's here she actually admits that she misses Dorothy, and Michael responds saying that he misses her too. I do think this film's use of the liar reveal trope, albeit very similar to how Mrs. Doubtfire also does it, is actually way better here. For starters, Michael's motivation is not to stalk his kids or whatever by dressing up as a woman, it's just to get an acting gig and hopefully pay the bills. So already, there's a much better reasoning here, and you can kind of resonate more with this character as a result. The other really big thing here is that Michael undergoes a real arc and also learns about how others may feel around him while under the guise of Dorothy. He very quickly finds out how it feels to be on the other side of intimidating forces, with many men in Hollywood trying to force themselves on him, and one nearly succeeding in raping him as Dorothy. It's incredibly jarring for him since he's never been treated like this before, and it's also very eye-opening for him since he now sees how others may feel when he's being forceful around them or being forceful about changes for his movies. It's a surprisingly pretty brilliant subversion of this trope, and I really commend this movie for actually doing this well, unlike Mrs. Doubtfire. However, while Robin Williams may have definitely struck out with Mrs. Doubtfire, he did happen to start another movie in the 90s that also does use this trope, but does it a lot better. I'm of course talking about the perennial Disney classic Aladdin. Aladdin is honestly just one of my favorite Disney movies overall, probably my top 5, but one thing I really do like this movie for is making the protagonist technically a liar, but make him good too, and actually someone that is genuinely worth rooting for. Obviously when Aladdin is first introduced on screen, he is shown to be a thief. A charming thief, sure, but still a thief. However, what the writers are able to do to make him resonate more with the audience is, after he's able to steal some bread and get away from some guards, he actually chooses to share this bread with some other kids that are also beggars, and have nothing just like him. If it had just been Aladdin stealing the bread and nothing else, it actually might have been harder to root for him throughout the rest of this movie. But since this scene occurs so early on and really sheds some light into who he really is, it does make it easy to root for him. Obviously, his main arc in this film is him learning to be himself and not feel the need to lie, since he lies about being a prince and tries to pose as one to oppress Princess Jasmine. And of course, his liar revealed moment eventually comes when Jafar takes over Agrabah and exposes Prince Ali as really being Aladdin to Jasmine. This is all done during his song Prince Ali Reprise, where he actually sings this in particular to Jasmine and Aladdin. Of course, eventually Aladdin does defeat Jafar, get reunited with Jasmine, and he opens up about being insecure about being himself. The Sultan changes the law, and the genie gets freed, and they all live happily ever after, just like every Disney movie. Well, unless it's Avengers Infinity War. But, what if I told you there is one last subversion of this liar reveal technique that actually inverts it, and ends up making it so the antagonist is actually the one whose lies are exposed, usually in a very clever way? And what if I told you that, just like in Aladdin, this whole liar revealed bit is actually done through music? Yep, I'm talking about none other than 8 Mile, the movie starring Eminem in a semi-autobiographical role. I know, right? I'm shocked too. This movie actually does this trope really well and totally turns it on its head, since instead of this trope being directed towards the protagonist is actually able to spin it at the antagonist. In this case, I'm referring to the final rap battle between Eminem and Papa Doc, where Papa Doc actually has dirt on Eminem. Or rather, the character he plays in this movie, B-Rabbit, or Jimmy Smith Jr. In this movie, Jimmy is a poor white kid living in a trailer park in Detroit with his mom, since he got fired from his previous job working at a pizza place and ends up working at New Detroit Stamping instead to save up some money and move out. All the while, he is also pursuing his lifelong dream of being a hip-hop star and writing raps on the side. However, he's he's judged by all of his black peers since they don't think a white artist can make it in the hip-hop industry, and plenty of people in this film, specifically the free world leaders, make him feel like he can't really perform on stage, which in the first act of the movie causes him to choke on stage when he's performing during a rap battle session at open mic night at the shelter. Later on in the movie, Jimmy is actually jumped and attacked by Papa Doc and the rest of the free world leaders in Jimmy's own trailer park, since earlier Jimmy actually beat up Wink, one of the free world leaders, since his girl was cheating on him with Wink. So afterward, in the ensuing rap battle where Jimmy actually decides to take on Papa Doc and the rest of the free world leaders, he realizes that Papa Doc knows about this and could easily use this as ammo to throw at him during the rap battle. So what he does is actually really clever and perhaps the ultimate inverse of the liar revealed trope. He ends up openly talking about everything that happened, including his girl Alex cheating on him with Wink and also him getting beat up at the trailer park, and wears out everything that he knows Papa Doc would probably use against him as ammo and makes it basically body armor so that he can't even be damaged by Papa Doc anymore. And then, to top this off, he ends up bringing up some dirt on Papa Doc himself that he knows about, including the fact that Papa Doc actually goes to a private school, and that his real name is Clarence of all things. In one fell swoop, Jimmy relieves Clarence not only of any ammo he might have had against him, but he also fires plenty of ammo back at him, including the fact that he hasn't really struggled like most people in Detroit that are watching him right now on stage have. And so, as a result, he's basically exposed as a fraud. This is absolutely the ultimate inverse of the liar reveal trope, and honestly, it's a really brilliant way to end this movie off. There was some really genius writing going on here, and it's just kind of refreshing to see this trope utilized in basically the complete opposite way, with the villain getting it instead of the main protagonist. Overall, while the liar reveal trope is often mishandled and not used very well, and can often kill a movie, I think there are definitely pretty talented writers out there that can subvert this trope and make it work, like the ones in Aladdin, 8 Mile, ReZero, Mulan, and plenty of others. It ultimately just comes down to how creative the writer is and how willing they are to work with this trope overall. I hope you enjoyed my discussion on this rather notorious film trope in general. It's obviously something that I study a lot. Being a major cinephile, I love analyzing film. If you'd like to see me discuss more film tropes on this channel overall, let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to hear suggestions from all of you. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you didn't like it, give it a like anyway. If you want to check out all my socials down below, you can see all those down there. And if you want to join my Discord too, where you can communicate with me and others offline, that should be linked down below. And if you want to check out my letterbox, that is linked down below as well. That's where I review movies, oftentimes movies or shows I won't review here on YouTube. So you can check that out too if you want extra content from me. But for now, I've been Noah the Otter, and I'll see you on the Otter side. Bye!